How's it going, Rogues Gallery, and welcome! Today, we're going to talk about this, Ave Dragonslayer. This is our second Flesh and Blood themed playmat and splash art of 2022, and that's not going to be the whole topic of today's video, but it is going to be the whole topic of today's video. And what I mean by that is we're not just going to kind of show it off. I'm also going to tell you about the process that went into designing this brand new character and making this splash art. So hopefully this can give you a better idea of what goes into these sorts of processes, because I worked with a industry professional. I worked with Crovius, a Flesh and Blood artist. In fact, she's one of my personal favorite Flesh and Blood artists. This frame's a little too big. We'll get a new frame later, but she's an artist that I absolutely adore her artwork. It's absolutely fantastic. And yeah, I'll tell you the whole story of it. But before we do, let's show off what the playmat actually looks like in person. It looks so good. This is Ave Dragonslayer. Look at that. That looks so good, and you can kind of see we did something special here with the frames. And by that I mean the zones. We actually made it so that Ave and the dragon that she is fighting are kind of popping out from the zones. And this is something we're going to be doing going forward for all of our Flesh and Blood mats. It is the perfect mix of actually having Flesh and Blood zones, but also showing off the amazing artwork. Ave Dragonslayer is actually available right now for pre-order on redzonerogue.com for $35 plus shipping. It is premium stitched, really high quality. I love it. This is the kind of quality that I strive for all of our Red Zone Rogue merch. You know, just like the Kotako's library before it, I think this is going to be a fan favorite. Just absolutely fantastic stuff. Really awesome job. I, of course, have all of the playmats here in stock. We're going to be selling 30 of them, but it's going to be a very exclusive 30 because all 30 of those will have an exclusive art card that goes with the playmat. So when you buy a playmat, you will get the art card limited to the first print run, the first 30, and we already have, at the time of this recording, 8 people have already purchased some, so we only have 22 left. And the reason it's a pre-order is because the art cards have not arrived yet. We just have the playmats, and so once the art cards arrive, we'll ship the playmats and do all that kind of stuff. I expect about a week or so. There should be a link in the description down below to both the artist Crovius art station and Twitter profile. You should definitely go follow her. She's an absolutely fantastic artist, as you could see. And also a link to where you can purchase the playmat and all of that kind of stuff. So enough of that. Let's talk about designing a brand new fantasy character, as well as, you know, how you go about getting it commissioned, the art design process, and all of that good stuff. So let's start at the beginning. At the beginning, I initially contacted 3 artists for the Red Zone Rogue 10K celebration last year. I contacted Bima, who we ended up doing the 10K art here. You can see it right here. I contacted Sylvia Meliani, who I also, you know, ended up doing art with. She did our Kotako's library, as you can see here. And then I contacted Crovius. These are some of my absolute favorite artists in Flesh and Blood. I just really wanted to work with them. And I'm so honored that they all agreed. And I think every one of these pieces turned out immaculate. So let's talk about Crovius's piece. So, like I said, we ended up going with Bima and Sylvia and Crovius. They were both busy, but we ended up working with them later on. And for Crovius, she was the one that I worked with last, obviously, since the mat is coming out now. But because of that, I had an idea. I wanted to make a brand new character, you know, a brand new original character for the channel. And I want to do this, I don't know, semi-often, like maybe once a year or something like that. I want to introduce a lot of new characters for the channel so people can have characters that they like and maybe identify with or just think that are really cool. And who knows, maybe someday I'll have this, you know, cast of expertly drawn fantasy characters that I have commercial rights to, that maybe we could use them for a game or something. That is way in the future, but, you know, just a little thought. So anyway, I wanted to make a new character, and I approached Crovius with this idea. Hey, I want to make a cool female warrior character, and I gave her a ton of references, a ton of references of multiple different kinds of female warriors and armors. I was like, hey, I think it'd be cool. She's like dual wielding like long swords. But I think I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. The way that this whole thing started was, you know, like I said, I emailed Emanuela Crovius, and I was like, hey, I have this idea, yada, yada, yada. What do you think? And then, you know, she agreed. She gave me her, commission rates and all of that kind of stuff, with commercial rights. That's something you really need to, make sure that you have the commercial rights to the art that you're commissioning, because it's usually significantly more expensive because you're paying to have, the commercial rights for this. So yeah, I emailed Crovius and I gave her like the lowdown. And then after that, I knew she was on board, I was like, awesome, let me get you a bunch of references for this new character, because part of that was designing the brand new character. And I want you to know that this is separate, right? You don't design the character and then do the piece. Like, I commissioned her separately to design Veya, and then I commissioned her to do the piece. I talked about it all at once, but it was this kind of thing where you need to do it separately, right? You don't just have an artist make up whip up a character for you, right? You need to have someone design the character for you. And so we did that. What's really cool about Veya's design is that at least her name is community chosen. So I actually had a couple, a sequence of polls on my Patreon where I was like, I solicited community suggestions for her name. And I picked out the names that I liked the most, and then my patrons voted on them. We had a couple rounds of voting, and it ended up being Veya, which I think is a really, really cool name. And I love how this character has that level of community involvement in it. I think it's really, really cool. So after Veya had been fully designed, the next step was, the actual splash art. And for this, I was like, hey, she's a cool warrior. I want her to be, fighting something. And at the time, this is way before we even knew about Uprising, and that Uprising was set in Volcor. And Volcor was one of the areas in Flesh and Blood that I really liked the most. And I was like, hey, could we set it in a world in Flesh and Blood? I don't remember if Crovius suggested that or if I suggested that, but we decided that we're going to set the piece in Wraith, right, in the world of Flesh and Blood, and I decided to end up, to go with Volcor. Also on top of that, she's like, okay, what do you want Veya to be fighting? I initially had said soldiers, but she also suggested monsters and, among other things, dragons, and I was like, yo, dragons sounds awesome. Keep in mind, like I said, this is way before we even knew about Uprising, so the timing of this could not have been better. And we went with it. She came back with 3 different sketches, and this is very, very common when you are working with an artist. They'll usually come back with a couple different sketches and be like, hey, which one do you like the most? Feedback. There's a lot of back and forth between this kind of stuff. I've been very fortunate to work with amazing artists, so I don't really ask for a ton of changes because their art is so good. I mean, there's a reason why I asked them to work with me to begin with. And she came back with 3 sketches, which you can see here, and we ended up going with, the obvious one here, though I did really like the other 2. There's some very dynamic poses here, but I really liked the one where she looks kind of like a dervish, like a tornado of death, and I think it looks really, really cool. And then after that, we can begin the actual process, and by we, the artist begins the actual process of coloring it. So she comes back with a rough color, which I've shared a couple times before, either on this channel or on my Patreon, so you can kind of see the rough color, and that's just kind of to get an idea, a feeling of the colors and how the composition is going to look. And then after we okayed that, this is a phase where you can request adjustments and that kind of stuff. After that, Crovius began the final line art and the final coloring and all of that kind of stuff until we got to the finished version. Now, this is another point where I may have been able to ask for changes, but I really loved it. I didn't really need any changes, but typically you don't ask for changes at this point, or significant changes, maybe some minor tweaks here and there, but that's basically the process. There's a lot of dialogue and involvement between both parties along almost every step of the way, going from designing the character, giving references and kind of vague, maybe not even vague, just ideas of what you want. I personally really like working with the artist, and they're better at this kind of stuff than I am because they're professional artists. And so I really, value their opinions a lot on this kind of stuff. And so I give a lot of the artists I work with a little more freedom. I can see how some artists might want less freedom in that regard and more like concrete directions, but I really like being very open and having a great discussion about this kind of stuff. And that's about gonna do it for the video today. Get another look at the actual physical version of Vea Dragonslayer. I'm so stoked for this. It turned out so well, and this is something that I'm probably gonna do maybe like once or twice a year for the Flesh and Blood style mats. And we'll have other styles of mats throughout the years for the other kind of games that I play. So you can expect like, maybe a fantasy anime style mat for Grand Archive. I also have like, other anime style mats for WeCross, all that kind of good stuff, because I want to be able to have products for everyone who watches Red Zone Rogue and my second channel, WeCross Zone. If you are into like WeCross, if you're into Flesh and Blood, I want to have something for you that I think is awesome. Anyway, that's going to do it for today's video. Don't forget to check out all the links in the description down below. Let me know your thoughts on like the art creation process. I think it's an absolute blast. I have a ton of fun with it. I love being like creative and like making these awesome characters. I always really look forward to it. If you would like a copy of Vea Dragonslayer, I do still have some available, at least at the time of this recording, in the description down below. I will continue to have them in stock, but the first print run, like I said, will have those special art cards. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Definitely check out all of Crovius's stuff, and I'll see ya next time.